everybody who's already on. We're just going live now because it is 1 o'clock, and we just want to respect everyone's time, but we are going to take a few minutes and let everyone grab their coffee, grab their water, possibly if you're taking this on lunch, get something to eat and get comfy. We have Dasha on. I'm super excited. I'll do a little bit of housekeeping here and say, hey, what's up, everyone? This is another Designs for Sport Masterclass. So this is our October Masterclass on gut health. So appropriately timed, as you know, if you're Canadian, you've had some holidays. If you are from the US, holidays are coming, or around the world. And I know we have coaches from all over who tune in. Plus, gut health in the context of health and fitness is a topic that is so underserved. And we have an amazing person to speak on this, a wealth of knowledge and just a beautiful, bubbly burst of energy. So I'm super excited to introduce Dasha. Before that, for those of you that have attended masterclasses before, you know this, but if you are new to the masterclass, Designs for Sport does monthly masterclasses with leaders in the industry on a variety of health, fitness, nutrition, business building topics, so that they can speak to topics that they are absolute experts in, and also allow you to connect with other coaches, sports nutritionists, sports dietitians, and health coaches in your community so that you can start to build your network. So as always, we will have an amazing presentation that's going to run the majority of our time here, but we are going to leave a good chunk, possibly 15 to 20 post presentation to address any of your questions. This is where you can ask experts live what's going on, get your questions answered. So we will absolutely do that, and please use the chat box, which I will be monitoring, to add in any questions that come up. Dasha has a lot of really cool little goodies that you're actually going to be receiving after because you attended, which is amazing. And then the other thing is, we were talking about this offline, so Dasha, maybe before I intro you, let's talk to the people that are on the call on kind of what we want to do from just a social connection standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. So to give you just a little bit of brief background, last week, right now I'm in Boston, so excuse the background, but I'm in Boston and I came here for the White House Nutrition Conference. And what they were talking about is how food is medicine moving forward. The next 5 to 10 years is really going to be focused in the United States about nutrition communication and using food as medicine for the United States. And so along those lines, I was like, you know what, we should do something to support each other as professionals in this network who are really trying our best to communicate effective nutrition that's evidence-based. So what we kind of decided, Melissa, was that we were going to have everyone, if you want to drop your IGs in the chat box right now, we will go in, I'll follow you guys, I'll support you, I'll repost what you guys are sharing so that we can all embrace nutrition communication together and be that voice of reason for people, because I know it's overwhelming with so many influencers and things like that right now. And then what we're going to do is, if you want to share a screenshot of you educating yourself and educating the public throughout this presentation, feel free to share slides. Tag us, Designs for Sport and Dasha Fitness. That's my channel, at Dasha Fitness. And we'll pick one of you guys to win a gift, right, from Designs for Sport.
Yeah, we are going to absolutely give away some goodies. So be sure to spread the word, tag us, and share whatever amazing tidbits that Dasha is going to be presenting on today. So it is almost 5 minutes past the hour, and I do see that we keep seeing people popping in. So what I will do is give you a brief intro. The sentence I'm about to say, I mean, I'm really glad that Dasha is going to continue to give you a bit more background into what she does, because it's super cool, everyone. We're really in for a treat. But Dasha Agoulnik is a registered dietitian. She's a 5-time published nutrition researcher, a 2-time award-winning bikini athlete, and graduated from the top nutrition graduate program in the country, Tufts University Friedman School. Her research and coaching, it focuses on optimizing metabolic and digestive health through nutrition and exercise. This is an amazing intersection. Dasha has helped over 500 people, and that is growing, to get results in just 3 months with substantial success. So without further ado, Dasha, I'm going to let you take it away, and I will be here in the chat box, so please continue to connect everyone and throw those IGs in. we will pick a winner soon.
Awesome. Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. I'm super excited to be here. As Melissa mentioned, I'm a registered dietitian. I specialize in gut health for athletes. My background is really in optimizing metabolic and digestive health through the food that we eat and the way that we train. I got my master's degree in nutritional epidemiology. So again, my background is very heavy in nutrition research, laboratory, community, you name it, focus groups. I've done it all. And that really has been helpful in terms of translating the research to you all who are joining us here. So that's really all we got to do about that. So presentation wise, we're going to start with what is a healthy gut, go through some of the 5 keys to improving our gut health, cover some exercise specific complications, optimizing nutrition, and then I decided it might be helpful for you all to talk about whey supplementation and the microbiome, since a lot of you are professionals in the field who are supplementing with this. Optimizing exercise for gut health. And then Melissa had mentioned a few of how quickly and the timelines of how we work when it comes to seeing benefits and seeing changes based off of the food we eat and how we exercise, as well as overcoming any digestive issues that you may be experiencing. So we'll go through that a little bit more. So first things first, what is a healthy gut? And the sad thing about this is it's really undefined. We have no marker of identifying the quantity as well as the specific types of strains that are associated with a healthy gut. All we really can say is that it's generally associated with a rich species diversity. So how do you accomplish that? It's really by incorporating all foods into the diet, consuming a lot of fibrous foods, and we'll go into this further into the presentation as well. But what we do know is what an unhealthy gut looks like. It's basically low diversity, an unbalance of good and bad gut bugs in the body, an increase in opportunistic parasites, high permeability, low growth rate of the inner mucosal layer, and a decrease in species associated with short-chain fatty acid production and butyrate specifically. Now, what are the 5 main ways that you can affect your gut health? And this is not just you, but your clients as well. The whole goal here is that we identify what is the biggest burden, but each one of these 5 speed pillars are important to improving your gut health. The first thing that I always talked about is sleep. Sleep is most important for everyone because it helps to not only clear out the GI, but also your immune system takes action and really works on recovery during your sleep. So sleep, number 1. Personal stress is another one. Anxiety, high stress life, and we'll talk about how these neurotransmitters can actually affect your GI. But just know that personal stress is a huge factor. And I've seen people who are not able to overcome their GI issues strictly because they are so high stress. So they're kind of keep themselves in this cycle of inability to recover from the infection. Third is environment. So this is when we talk about like California forest fires, or we talk about the air that we're breathing in high population cities, or the water that we're drinking. So you can always go online, by the way, and you can check your local community to see how good the water quality is. But I would always recommend a reverse osmosis system to people, as well as a HEPA filter for their house, because we are 80% water. So you are what you breathe, and then your water that you intake, and then the food that you eat, essentially. Fourth is exercise, and we'll talk about modalities of how you can increase and lower stress associated with exercise. And then lastly is diet, which we'll also talk about. So all of these come into play, and the more and more we have higher amounts of personal stress, or we have really intense training sessions, these what we call kind of add to our bucket. And so we're able to tolerate this bucket for a good amount of stress. But once it starts overflowing is when we see a lot of those symptoms come up. So we see more bloating, more indigestion, more gas. We see our social lives maybe start getting impacted, and the way that we communicate with our relationships and our loved ones. So it's really important to go back, and yes, it feels like diet is the main thing when it comes to GI, but all of these things are impacting our stress levels, and stress is stress in the body. So if we can optimize those 5 pillars in our lives and empty the bucket, we're going to be able to tolerate that stress a lot better. So when it comes to athletes, the majority of the time, we really can't alter our exercise, right? If we're talking a true professional athlete, we can't just say, oh yeah, I'm not really gonna go to the Olympics this year, gonna back out. Of course, we cannot do that, but what we can do is create this balance. We're gonna push and we're gonna pull as quickly and as efficiently as we can once those biomarkers around us start telling us that, hey, your bucket is overflowing, we need to dump out in some other areas of the life, right? So maybe you're going through a bulk and your diet is really causing a lot of inflammation and stress in the body. Okay, well, let's go back. How's sleep at that point? How is your personal stress? How is your environment? Where else can we kind of plug and chug and push and pull the systems in order to get a great balance in your GI health and in your performance at the Olympics? So 30 to 70% of athletes experience issues. Mostly this is going to be runners, cyclists, and weightlifters. Pain is more common in the younger athletes and those in longer duration activities. Usually athletes that are more fit have less severe symptoms. And again, severity will increase with the intensity and your fluid status. So the 3 main ways that exercise will impact your GI directly is first, decrease blood flow to the gut. So when we exercise, blood is flowing to our muscles, right, as we're actively moving, which leads a lot less blood flow to the GI. And so hypoxia, or a lack of oxygen, may cause some cramping and GI upset. The second is the actual movement of the organ against each other. Now, this is the mechanical force, right? Now, this could be a good or a bad thing. Think about it this way. If you have someone who is like, you just ate Thanksgiving dinner and now you're gonna go jump up and down 20 times, it's not gonna feel great. It's not going to feel great to have all that moving food in your stomach, but also it's the actual organs that are moving against each other and causing some potential inflammation or irritation. Now, it could be a good thing when I talk about hiatal hernias, for example. If you feel like you have acid reflux and you feel like the food is sitting there, something that I like to implement in my clients is that they do heel drops, which is essentially if you stand up flat, you raise your heel down and then you smack it on the ground. And you just keep continuing. Raise, smack, raise, smack. Now what's that doing? It's pushing and utilizing gravity to actually help digest that food and work out any gas bubbles that might be there. So there's kind of a difference here where mechanical force may be beneficial for you if you're struggling with that and you need to get something to just like smack that down a little bit, versus a bad thing where you're running very long distance and your organs are all juggling against each other and it's causing that inflammation. Now, the third is neuroendocrine function. So what is that? Well, exercise activates what's called the autonomic nervous system. This increases the circulating concentrations of cortisol, catecholamines, epinephrine, norepinephrine into your peripheral tissues and in the gastrointestinal tract. This, again, as I just mentioned, results in the reduced blood flow in the GI tract. So that causes that hypoxia again, or the lack of oxygen, but it also depletes ATP, and it also causes oxidative stress. Now, these oxidative stress, low oxygen levels, ATP depletion, all of these damage the gut barrier, increasing your intestinal permeability, what people often associate with quote unquote leaky gut. That's the increase in intestinal permeability. Endotoxemia, nutrient depletion, inflammation, all of these things are happening as a result of the fact that exercise by nature activates our stress pathways, our autonomic nervous system. And remember that all of those other 5 pillars are still activating your, or have the potential to activate your autonomic nervous system as well, which is really important to remember that that's really what we're trying to mitigate here, right? The stress and the recovery. So the GI responds to this stress by activating and releasing neurotransmitters like GABA, neuropeptide Y, dopamine. All of these are associated with gastrointestinal disturbances because neurotransmitters in our gut actually play a role in motility. A lot of people get that confused and they think, oh, neurotransmitters, it must be why I'm so happy today. Or neurotransmitters, it must, and that's maybe some part of it is right, but the majority of the neurotransmitters in our gut actually have to play roles in motility and the movement of our gastrointestinal system. So as mentioned, these physical effects are all proportional to the duration, the intensity, and the frequency of the exercise, which on our end gives us the ability to push and pull here systems, right? Because maybe we need to lower or increase intensity, or lower duration or increase duration, or lower frequency or increase frequency. Now, when it comes to the actual nutrition, the food that we eat is all broken down in the small intestine. So you can see at the top left here, this is by Hughes et al. If you want to read up on the paper itself, but it was one of the probably best reviews that we've had in the literature to date, really going through all the mechanisms of how the microbiota and specifically in athletes are modulated within each other. So we see at the top left here, protein, fats, these are all the foods that we eat or our athlete eats. It goes into the small intestine. In the small intestine, it's broken down into amino acids, fatty acids, non-digestible carbohydrates, FODMAPs, and probiotics, which you see entering into the large intestine there in the screen. And here in the large intestine, this is where the anaerobic bacteria can begin to ferment those foods and really change and modulate the foods from what has entered. And what they will create is short chain fatty acids, secondary bile acids, all of these gases, etc. And that can affect the barrier function, the GI distress, the glycogen storage, which you then see on the left-hand side there. So how does it do this? Well, we talk about fiber a lot, right? And short chain fatty acids. So short chain fatty acids, for example, in skeletal muscle can be oxidized, incorporated into glucose via gluconeogenesis, or increase the bioavailability of glucose, glycogen, and fatty acids during exercise. This means we have better performing athletes. And short chain fatty acids can then also contribute to increased blood flow, insulin sensitivity, skeletal muscle mass preservation, and mitigating the effects of the oxidative stress that was caused by exercise. So it's really important that we're recovering properly, we're digesting the food properly, and here's where there can be the disconnect, right? Now, it could be that our athletes are not fueling themselves properly. It could be that they're not fueling themselves properly with the right types of food. It could be that there is an infection, an overgrowth, H. pylori, SIBO, candida, something that's preventing them from actually digesting that food. And now the microbiota don't have anything to create these beneficial byproducts from. So how do we optimize the nutrition in our athletes? It's really quite simple, to be honest. When it comes to fats, monounsaturated fatty acids, omega-3s, regulating inflammation through the polyunsaturated fatty acids is the best way possible. MCT oil or medium chain triglycerides may have an antimicrobial effect. Lauric acid, caprylic acid, those are all medium chain triglycerides that have been studied in the literature to help to get rid of things like candida. Carbohydrates. Of course, we know carbohydrates play a huge role in our athletes' performance, probably one of the most important. So we want to focus on complex, non-digestible carbohydrates like fiber as much as we can to increase that microbial diversity and create those short-chain fatty acids. And then also proteins. So plant proteins or low animal protein diets have had more beneficial impact on gut microbiota. This is from the literature. However, as someone who's in the field, I can very much guarantee that this likely has to do with confounding variable of the fiber itself. However, that's not to say, and we'll get into this a little bit more with the whey supplementation papers, that every single thing that we eat is going to modulate our gut, whether it's broccoli, whether it's asparagus. Yes, they're both green vegetables, but our bacteria in our bodies are going to digest them differently, right? Phenols, indols, all of these byproducts and chemical processes differ within each specific food that we eat, which is why, again, we want to create the most diverse diet as possible for our athletes. And that might include having to go through some sort of elimination diet to identify our food triggers. Now, I don't have time to get into it today, but this is why food sensitivity tests are pretty inaccurate, and the best way to go about it is really to help your athlete or you find the foods that work best for you. Now, if you're having a lot of GI distress, we'll talk about some of the prevention strategies. But before I get into that, I just want to mention this is a great kind of slide to remind ourselves about the keto diet, and how eliminating food groups is not going to be the best case scenario for our gut, because remember, variety is key and essential for our gut microbes in order to create a balance of good gut flora and feed those gut bugs. So eliminating proteins is not good. Overdoing proteins is not good. Eliminating carbs is not good. Overdoing carbs is not good. Same thing with the fats, okay? So when it comes to athletes and GI health, and this again might be a strategy that you use to push and pull the systems and symptoms. So for example, let's say you're having a really tough time digesting carbs because you constantly feel bloated. Maybe you need to pull back on fiber. Maybe you need to lower carbohydrates in the diet. Maybe you need to work on increasing fats for a little bit of time. Or your athlete's struggling with digesting proteins. Maybe we do a protein cycle where we go low protein for a couple of weeks and then we push them with higher protein amounts. This was a concept that is in the literature that was explored for a little bit. Just like carb cycling, they were talking about protein cycling. And I think similarly, you could talk about keto and cycling fats in the diet. I think what's best to remember is that we can always navigate through these three macronutrients. So really identifying which one's causing the issues and then going from there may be helpful in the short term to lower the symptoms, but it's always best to get to the root cause, because that might just be a Band-Aid, and we never want a Band-Aid approach long term, which we'll talk about with low FODMAP diets, gluten-free diets, etc. So as I said, optimizing nutrition for gut health is super simple, right? You had three main pillars. They had one bullet point to them, but life is not. So just because something is simple doesn't mean that it's easy to do. And that's where you come in as a practitioner or you come in as an athlete and you try and make it simple and digestible, no pun intended, to make it easy to follow and not so overwhelming. So prevention. How do we really increase our performance and prevent GI upset? The first is to make training with carbohydrates a part of your routine. Now, if you have trained up to the Olympic events low carb, and then all of a sudden on the day of your event, you eat a lot of carbohydrates, it's probably not the best idea. So making sure that training with carbohydrates is a part of your routine so your body knows which ones to digest. How do you know how you'll react to glucose versus fructose versus a cyclic dextrin? It's important to find the carbohydrates that work best for your body based off of the osmolality of it, how your GI is absorbing those foods. So let's get into a routine with making carbohydrates a part of your training ahead of time. Avoiding high fat or high fiber foods hours or days before may help to mitigate some of the gastric distress that's associated with breaking down foods. So remember that fiber slows our motility or the movement of our gut, and then fats are also take a little bit longer to digest. So Perhaps if this is you, avoiding a high fat or high fiber meal hours or a couple days before may be a good strategy to prevent any GI upset, because food is flowing better through the system. Nothing is getting caught up there or delayed up there that might cause bacteria to ferment on them, create gas, cause bloat, etc. And then last but not least, as we all know, avoiding dehydration is going to be key. So you're probably thinking, okay, you just told me that I needed to increase the amount of short chain fatty acids in my diet, and yet you're telling me now to avoid high fiber. So how do I do this, right? This is where I say we push and pull the systems, right? Just because you're low fiber for 2 days will increase perhaps your performance in your event, but it will not modulate your gut significantly in a detrimental way. So maybe we push the system with fiber a little bit on more of the weeks leading up to it, and then we can decrease during the event. And I don't mean like super high amounts of fiber, I just mean bringing it back to normal, if that makes sense. And so what is normal? It's about 25 to 35 grams of fiber per day. We want to see about 14 grams per 1,000 calories. So if you have an athlete eating 10,000 calories a day, I would call that an extreme. Let's talk football season, right? I would call that an extreme, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend still that fiber get tapered that high because they're already struggling to get in that much nutrition. So it just depends on the person, but hopefully that gives a good baseline for you all. But when it comes to finding and increasing short chain fatty acids, there are wise ways to go around this as well. So yes, we know fruits, we know veggies, we know whole grains, we know oats, we know legumes, but trying to tailor this nutrition to the person, find the fiber that works best for you, right? There's so many fibers out there. There's soluble, there's insoluble, there's R1, 2, 3, 4. There's so many types of fibers. Find the one that works for you or your athlete. Maybe that's flax, maybe that's chia, maybe that's cooked and cooled starches. Something that works for you. That's what really the preventative strategy is going to be about. So let's talk a little bit about these two papers that we've seen that have been published about whey supplementation and the gut microbiome. I would say they're not very conclusive either way, but they do highlight some good points for athletes. So on the left was a randomized pilot study in cross-country runners whose diets were complemented with a protein supplement, either whey or beef hydroxylate. Both groups, the control, which was maltodextrin, or the protein group, both had 12 people in it, and it was ran for 10 weeks, sorry. The protein intake increased by 20 grams with the protein group, but had no significant changes otherwise to their diet between the groups. Now the athletes in the protein group had an increase in their Bacteroides group and lower Firmicutes group. And this was just by increasing their protein intake by 20 grams, right? Everything else stayed basically the same between the groups. So thus, this doesn't seem like much, right? But we are able to validate that Bacteroides have increased proteolytic activity, meaning if you are eating more protein, you will feed the gut bugs that are responsible for breaking down those proteins, right? And so by doing that, you're increasing that Bacteroides family. And so if you have someone who is constantly eating protein and supplementing protein and not getting enough nutrition otherwise, this can cause an imbalance of the Bacteroides to Firmicutes ratio. Now, Bacteroides is more responsible for our immune modulation, and the Firmicutes family is more responsible for our short chain fatty acids. So the balance of the two in the ratio is really, really important, and it's been associated in the literature with metabolic dysfunction when the ratio creeps closer to one or the other. We always want to see that ratio be close to 0. And then when it creeps up to 1, that's when we get a little bit worried that one of the two groups might be imbalanced. And again, we want to make sure that our short chain fatty acids and our immune modulation, we want to make sure that they're pretty equal. So it's pretty important to just note here the concept that might be associated with why the keto diet is so bad for our gut health might have to do with this imbalance of the amount of short chain fatty acids, which we know are created from the fibrous foods that we're eating. We have very low amounts of that Firmicutes then, and we would have higher amounts of that Bacteroides, for example, in that situation. Again, and we see that in very high fat diets, and we see that in a lot of the mouse studies as well. Now, in the second study that was done, it was a little bit larger. Subjects were required to be physically inactive for at least 3 months prior to the study, which means that they weren't engaged in any regular structured exercise. And then the 3 groups that they studied there were exercise, exercise and protein, or protein only. And what they saw here was that both the protein and the exercise plus protein group actually had a new viral or phage species found within them, which was Lactococcus, which is suggesting that the virome of the whey was transferred into the participants themselves. They did this because they looked into the whey supplement, and then they also did a plant-based protein and noticed that it didn't have these strains of the phage that was found in the participants. So they analyzed the whey and they found, oh wow, the whey has this phage in it. And then we also saw it increase within the groups supplementing with that whey protein. So of course we need further in-depth experimentation to determine if this is the case, but it could point into the direction as to why the source of your whey protein may modulate your microbiome more than we once thought. So how do we optimize our exercise for nutrition, for our gut health? As I mentioned, lower intensity might promote gastrointestinal motility, as intense exercise may cause some disturbances. We're going to want to have habitual carbohydrate intake, increase mobility, making sure that our pelvic floor function is really good, not too tight or not too loose, which is associated more, we can think, with postpartum women. Might want to swap something like running, which is a lot of movement on the stomach, for something less intensive like rowing. We can swap endurance exercises, again, that long duration, for something like resistance training. But I will say that the number one thing to remember is that all forms of exercise elicit stress on the system. So if you are trying to empty your bucket and recover, exercise is not the way to recover. Okay, the only form of exercise that will lower your stress and not increase it is walking. And I'm not saying like walking miles upon miles. I'm saying a good 20-minute walk is going to lower your stress. And this is good habits to incorporate in anyone's life when you're feeling stressed. Just go for a walk because it will lower your stress actively. Everything else, when people say, I go to the gym because it lowers my stress, technically, it actually increases your stress systemically. So this is just something to remember when it comes to exercise and GI distress. A lot of times I will pull exercise completely from my clients for the first couple of weeks in order to lower inflammation, stress, and water retention. So you can also decrease load or volume, you can increase your rest days, you can practice yoga, you can increase the amounts of reps in reserve or decrease the amount of rate of perceived exertion when you're lifting to, again, kind of help you to lower the amount of stress that you are eliciting from your training routine. So reps in reserve would be like, you feel like you could do 10 more lifts, and maybe we want to keep it to a point where you don't go to failure, so you feel like you could do 5 or 6 more after you finish the exercise. Rate of perceived exertion would be like 10 is like failure. You're going at like a 5. You feel like this isn't too hard, but I'm not just doing body weight at this point. Now, the most common nutrient deficiencies I see in athletes typically occur in females, just because we're at higher risk of iron deficiencies from our menses. And then Dysbiosis additionally, so if you have bad gut health, it increases your risk of poor B vitamin absorption. So B12 is synthesized and utilized by bacteria in our microbiome. So if you don't have enough of this bacteria that's synthesizing and utilizing the B12 properly, then it can lead to thus anemia. So you always want to check B12, folate related anemias, which might show up as low hematocrit, high MCV and MCH on just a basic CBC CMP panel. And then lastly, vitamin D and calcium to protect bone health. I see a lot of people taking out dairy when they're trying to improve their GI health. And yes, there are foods and sources of calcium apart from dairy, but vitamin D with the calcium is very important. And so unless you're consuming absorbent amounts of salmon fresh, and I don't know who's doing that in this economy, but it can be very difficult to do. So you want to make sure that you're supplementing with vitamin D to protect the bones. A lot of times I do see GI disturbances causing people to restrict certain food groups. So whether that be gluten, dairy, FODMAPs, whatever it is not meant to be long-term. Remember that is a band-aid and we need to get to the root cause, because FODMAPs are not inherently bad. In fact, FODMAPs are a really great source of fibers to feed good gut bugs. So they feed the bad ones too sometimes, but they can also feed the good, which is why we see improved digestive symptoms when we lower FODMAPs, is probably because we're also lowering fiber in the diet subconsciously, though there is more to it, of course. So for the following, the gluten-free and the FODMAP friendlies, we want to make sure that we're really looking into iron, calcium, folate, B12, and then the fat-soluble vitamins, just in case we're not absorbing fat properly either. So vitamins A, D, E, and K are all the fat-soluble vitamins that we want to triple check about. Now, the most common gastrointestinal issues I see in active individuals in general are SIBO, low digestive capacity, GERD or H. pylori, hemorrhoids, and hernias. So SIBO, or at low digestive capacity, I see SIBO most common with high stress females who have chronically dieted and then eat so many vegetables, so many FODMAPs that now they bloat at the sight of even broccoli. And I see low digestive capacity in both people who bulk or cut very harshly. And what I mean by that is they diet or they try and gain weight significantly over the course of 3, 4, 5, 6 months. The reason is because both dieting and increasing the amount of food that you're eating significantly can lower your digestive capacity, right? Someone eating 10,000 calories a day, obviously that's going to be really burdensome. And so they probably have a low digestive capacity relative to the amount of food that they're eating. And then similarly with people who are under eating or chronic dieting, your body's not used to having the need to give off enough stomach acid or pancreatic enzymes. I mean, you've down regulated that system for so long. So that's where I see a lot of the low digestive capacity. And in both of those cases, that can lead to SIBO just because we have some small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. GERD or acid reflux, I see is very common. Half of the population has H. pylori, so under periods of stress, it could become pathogenic. So the normal common strain of H. pylori that most of us have, it may overgrow and become pathogenic. And so that's one of the ones that I see very common. Hemorrhoids and hernias, I would say, for athletes specifically as well, just because they are constantly very tense or in the gym, and that can cause those breakages. Now, when it comes to timelines, it can change depending on the person. So remember how I said that I pulled exercise and just went through an elimination protocol with people. This is with all of my clients. I essentially start with just lowering inflammation. That is my first phase, my first tackle that I do with anyone, is we want to lower inflammation as much as possible through those 5 gut health pillars that I initially talked about. So whether that be exercise, whether that be diet, stress, sleep, etc., we are really focusing in on what's causing them the most inflammation at this time. So on the bottom left, you see in 1 week. Now this is purely just she's eating the same amount of calories. All we did was swap the types of foods that she's eating, and completely eliminate exercise. Okay, so she lost probably 5 or 6 pounds of pure water. That was all bloat water. We know calorie wise she's eating the same amount. But this is just to show how much diet and exercise really do impact how we feel and our stress levels in our bodies during times of gut distress. So most of these drastic initial changes, I've seen up to 10 pounds, and good Lord, God bless the person who lost 10 pounds in a week from just eliminating coffee, right? Those people, mainly it's a water manipulation thing, and those people are probably in a lot of pain when they initially come to you, just from how much water they're holding and how inflamed they are. It rarely ever is it fat loss that quickly. We all know here just by our field that it's not possible to lose fat that quickly, and in fact I would never recommend anyone to lose fat that quickly. Typically 1 or 2 pounds a week is a good starting point, if not less. But just remember that 1 gram of carbohydrate also holds 3 grams of water. So depending on their carb manipulations, or this, for example, why you see that initial keto weight loss is mainly because you're losing a lot of water versus carbohydrate, the actual substance within you, the glycogen. So by improving your gut health, athletes, you can consume more food and consume a greater variety of food, because your processing is enhanced when your inflammation is down, which is why we start off with that lowering inflammation. I put them on the Core Perform protocol. It's something that I just created on my own and trademarked. It is a low FODMAP, low histamine. It includes paleo, AIP, all of it in one. But what I did was I put it into just this green, yellow, reds list for my clients, so that essentially when they looked at it, they would know. We have 3 columns as well for vegetables that are associated with different processes biomechanically. So we have dark leafy greens, we have colorful fruits and veggies, we have sulfur-rich vegetables, all for, again, liver, microbiota, fat-soluble vitamins, calcium that might be eliminated, and then we slowly build out the diet from there, so that over the course of 12 weeks, for example, they've lowered their inflammation, their gut flora has been restored, and they're now able to train and perform in the gym more optimally. So that was just the bottom left was 1 week. In the case study above it with the 6 weeks, this again is no exercise. For 6 weeks, she did not exercise. And then once we did bring in exercise into her diet, I think it was within 2 or 3 weeks, she just starts dropping weight like crazy, because we've taken the time to keep her at a maintenance of 2,300, 2,400 calories. As someone who's not exercising, that's a fair amount for her size. And that way, when we did go and drop down to 2,000 calories, her body responded very, very quickly, because it's now been primed, it's optimized, she's able to consume more food and a greater variety of food and perform better in the gym. And so the results come faster, better, quicker when you take the time off. And so I can't express enough how much that push and pull really matters here when it comes to gut health and athletic recovery. You have to give your body the nourishment it needs from the ground up. And a lot of times that means pulling back systems in order for inflammation to go down, so that when you do push, it's effective. So that's all I really have for you all. Thank you guys for joining me. You can find me on Dasha Fitness. You can feel free to email me any questions or check us out at coreperform.com. I have a bunch of free recipes that are Core Perform approved on my website. We have blog posts about which proteins are better for athletes, for gut health. I talk about food sensitivity tests on there. I talk about greens powders on there, etc. And then I'll also leave this slide for you all if you ever want to read more about the literature that was covered. You can screenshot this and then go back to it for reading.
Holy moly. Okay. That was awesome. Thank you so much, Dasha. I have a ton of questions that I see here in the chat that I want to get to, but what I want to say is that I immediately felt triggered when you were like, no exercise, like, no way, don't you dare take it away. And I think that if you are a coach, a nutritionist, an athlete, if you're listening to this right now and that triggered you, check in, because we by default tend to, and I think Dasha just nailed it. It's like, I had a bad day, and we actually normalize this. You've had a bad day, so go to the gym and lift. You're exhausted and you're overworked and you've burned the candle at both ends for a month. Go to the gym and like get a crazy leg day in. And I think, you know, as coaches, as athletes, what we really need to become aware of and understand is that our sport is stress. Our lack of sleep is stress. The perceived notion of stress, and this is regardless of how we perceive it, beneficial or negative, is stress. Regardless of, and then there's the inputs, of course, of food and all of the other things that we know of that can cause stress. We live a very high stress lifestyle, and you sometimes have to say no to get ahead. So anyways, I'm going to get off my soapbox and let everybody else have a chance. This was really cool.
I love that. Yeah. And one of the things that I actually do focus on during this time is it is a hard shift for so many people, including myself. Like I've been through it too before. That's why during those initial few weeks, what might be helpful if you're going through this or your client's going through this, I give my clients mindful journaling exercises. And so I have them actually go through a list that identifies their core values as a human being so that they know exercise doesn't define me. My actions lead up to my values of family. How can I spend this time that I'm not exercising to give to the things that actually matter to me as a human being and define me at like an inner kind of human being? And I think that process is very much transformational for a lot of people, as well as when we start to taper back that exercise and that training, it gives them much more freedom and lowers their stress around the actual topic of exercise or food in general, as we're able to mitigate that and kind of challenge ourselves through working through it.
Very, very good point. And identifying your why is just a strong way to, you know, operate in general. I have the chat box open, and I do have some questions that I'm going to get to. And while we're answering some of these questions, to those that might have jumped on a little bit like into the presentation or when Dasha had started speaking, we are really trying to work to bring together this community of really good education, awareness on using food as medicine. Dasha spoke to that at the top of the call. If you haven't put your Instagram handle in the chat box, please do so, because number one, Dasha has a ton of goodies that are going to be sent over to you, resources, information, etc. We are going to be giving away some product, and it's just going to allow you to connect with other people on this call who might even be in your area. That could be a network, could be a resource, or could be another coach who's doing what you're doing. So what an amazing way to connect with some of your colleagues. So you can drop that in the chat box. But I'm going to start first with a coach from a question from Coach D, who I know. Hi, D. Oh, pardon me, actually, that was a comment from her. But the question that we have here is from someone named Alyssa. Do you feel that dysbiosis contributes to lower back fat? So, Alyssa, if you're still on the call, I mean, I'm assuming we're talking maybe like lumbar area, low back. Any connection there, Dasha?
So it's funny you mentioned this because I did a consulting project once. This guy wanted to create the ultimate meal. He wanted to say, if you could eat this one thing every single day, how do we digest fructose, galactose, like every single nutrient in our body, and where is it stored and how? And what I will tell you is, and something that you're going to hate me for, is that every body is so different. So it's very difficult for us to understand where the fat will be stored. But what I can say is that yes, dysbiosis is associated with increased metabolic dysfunction, which can lead to increased rate of fat storage in general throughout the system. I cannot say that it's specific towards the back because that's going to depend on the person, but absolutely.
Okay, very cool. And possibly a way to, explain that to your client and have them understand a little bit more about what is going on and why things are happening in their body. This is another question from Melissa, possibly referring to a similar client concept. So the question is, I'm just scrolling up here. I have a client with microscopic colitis, and the only food group that doesn't cause a flare up is carnivore. What are your thoughts on carnivore? And that's going to be really interesting because you did a really good section on the ketogenic diet and a lot of these sort of, fad diets.
Yes. So I am personally, again, you guys know me, I am very much balance is everything. So when it comes to restricting food groups, eliminating food groups, I am not a proponent for it from a gut health perspective. Now, what I will say is that microscopic colitis, I have so many clients who have had that or have that. The biggest thing for them, honestly, is really to help them identify those food triggers. So as I mentioned, going through an elimination diet, perhaps working with a dietitian who might be able to assist you guys with that would be best if you're not one yourself. But and then someone who specializes in it as well. But when it comes to the elimination diet and colitis itself, lowering the amount of fiber from the diet is actually going to help them a lot. But the trick is, in order to not decrease the amount of short chain fatty acids that are being produced, is that we, one, find those foods that don't cause a flare, the fibers that don't cause a flare, but also you can use something called psyllium husk. And psyllium husk is what they use in like Metamucil, but you can buy it off Amazon, $10 for a huge bag of it. And it's great for diverticulitis, any sort of inflammation in the GI, colitises. Tapering that up, I have some clients who have tapered up to 30, 40 grams of psyllium husk just to help calm and solidify their GI, as well as, of course, taking out nuts, seeds, fibrous foods and veggies that'll irritate the lining. So just remember that with that population, it's kind of like, I kind of like to say like their intestines are on fire like this, and the more foods that we can put in that are gonna poke it and prod it, like seeds or hard nuts that are gonna knock on it, or like dark leafy kale greens that are gonna go in it. It's really about texture for that population. So soft, smooth, pureed foods, easy to digest, easy to absorb for them. But again, not medical advice. I'm not treating, prescribing anything with that suggestion. It's just what I would do if I had colitis.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I don't think I would want to exfoliate my really sunburned face with a kale leaf.
Exactly, exactly.
A question from Alexandria. She's left, but let's answer that so that if you're catching the replay or perhaps you thought of this, maybe you can get the answer as well. You discussed a low FODMAP diet. So the question is how to restore gut flora with a low FODMAP diet.
And so you're going to want to understand why you have trouble with a higher FODMAP diet in the first place. So I see this a lot with SIBO because I believe the statistic, don't quote me on this, is like 57% of those with IBS actually have SIBO and their doctors just haven't tested them for SIBO. So in those cases, I would just say make sure that you're actually eliminating the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and you're not just trying to manage your IBS with some low FODMAP diet. Make sure you're getting to that root cause, actually removing that bacterial flora, and then re-inoculating the gut with some good polyphenols, prebiotics, probiotics after that phase, because a lot of times that population is not going to tolerate prebiotics well, aka FODMAPs, as well as probiotics. There's too much going on with the overgrowth.
Awesome. And I have one more question here. There's a ton of Instagram handles, so continue to add those. Love that everyone is connecting here. That's really what these master classes are for, is so that, of course, you can speak with a leader in the industry, have your questions answered, but also connect with your colleagues, because it's really all about helping everyone out. Now, this is a question on inflammation. This is from Joseph, and it's just understanding how to help the inflammatory response. The question says, helping the inflammatory response through digestive capacity. Joseph, do you maybe want to elaborate on digestive capacity, or Dasha, if you want to speak to that based on your interpretation of that question?
Would love to hear more from Joseph in terms of how digestive capacity has to do with inflammation. I'm wondering if you mean like when you're bulking, for example, and you're really inflamed and your digestive capacity is low, and how you can help with that. This is where I say volume of food really matters, and even pushing and pulling. So when I have heavy, deep bulks with clients and patients, it's kind of like, how do we mitigate that inflammation as much as possible and push and pull the systems? And so I'll have days where they can eat at maintenance for a few days. And just like you would do a diet break and you would bump someone up to up to maintenance from a caloric restriction perspective, sometimes if you're up here, you just need a few days back here and then you can go back up to it. Depending on the person, you could try and utilize, there's kind of three things that I like to do for low digestive capacity. And it starts with the least harsh and goes to the most harsh, because a lot of people that go to the most harsh, they have heartburn, acid reflux, which again might be contraindicated. I'll get to it, but start from the bottom here. So with the bottom ones, I would say apple cider vinegar with your meal, just a couple of teaspoons. It's really great for insulin sensitivity as well, which has been proven. I know a lot of people are iffy about apple cider vinegar doing much, but it does show benefits for some of the guys out of NutriSense, which have been doing continuous glucose monitoring, have seen a lot of good benefits from even 2-3 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar before a meal to help with the glucose response. So regardless, when it comes to just aiding in an acidic environment, that might help. The other thing, obviously, lemon waters, and really breaking down the why behind the digestive capacity. Is it because of a motility issue? Like, is it because you're not going to the bathroom that much? In which case, maybe you need to tackle more of like a ginger or some kiwis or some prune juice, something that'll get you going so you don't feel as bloated and backed up and unable to digest the food properly. So that's the lowest kind of thing. I'll say the medium kind of barrier would be digestive bitters. So things like dandelion root tea can stimulate bile acid secretion in the body, which can help to break down fats. So dandelion root tea, or digestive bitters that you can just take, like, or it's usually a concoction of dandelion, ginger, fennel, things like that, that just stimulate a little bit more of that secretion, which you can try. And then the last one that I would say is something stronger like HCl, betaine HCl, which can help with protein digestion specifically. However, I will forewarn that betaine HCl or HCl supplementation when you have H. pylori or if you feel a burning sensation is contraindicated. So please be sure that you do not have any H. pylori in your body, because it will increase your risk of gastric cancers and gastric ulcers, which are obviously not great to have. So if you have any sort of GI irritation, don't take that.
Yeah, I was going to ask when you were speaking on apple cider vinegar, because sometimes outside of an insulin response, apple cider vinegar is used to help to stimulate digestion, or you see that bitter foods like bitter greens or bitter vegetables can help to stimulate digestion. So you can do that through food. I was thinking betaine because I do understand that there's obviously, you know, a taste factor to having apple cider vinegar. You're legitimately taking shots of vinegar. And then it's also one extra step, something else that you're traveling with. So, you know, if someone is looking for a convenient option, and Designs for Sport does have betaine as an option for digestive support, which is, again, really underserved in the performance community. It's good to know that, provided you don't suspect any H. pylori, that you can use some betaine to help you with this as well.
Yeah, and even if you're suffering with low digestive capacity, I would again look into getting like your B complex too, because again, if you're not digesting that protein properly, then your bacteria is probably not making enough of that B12. The other thing I wanted to mention is when and if you do use apple cider vinegar, never take it straight as a shot or like the tablespoons. Whenever I say like a tablespoon or a shot of ACV, I always want you to double that with water. So if you're taking a shot of ACV, you want to take at least a shot. I always like to say like 4 to 6 ounces of water, put it in there. And then if you're doing a couple tablespoons of ACV, you want to do it in 2 or 3 ounces of water. It is very harsh on the esophageal lining if you do something harsh like acid like that. So you want to just protect yourself a little.
Makes it a lot easier to take. Now, Joseph had a question on the connection between digestive capacity, or sorry, using apple cider vinegar and insulin. Perhaps maybe we can add that just for purposes of time, the link to that research. I think you had mentioned the researcher or the group that had done some of that literature or produced some of that work. So maybe we can reference that, and Joseph, you can look into it. And I'm going to take one more question. I know we're here at our hour mark, but from Stephen, an NSF sport question. So if a coach who is working with a professional team and requires that NSF sport, obviously the Designs for Sport line is entirely NSF sport certified. You mentioned Core Perform protein. Is the Core Perform protein an NSF sport certified product that a professional athlete who's tested can use?
So unfortunately, I am not. So there's a difference. There's being manufactured in an NSF safe facility, and then there's also purchasing the actual like label. Yes. I am bootstrapping the entire company, so I do not have like tens of thousands of dollars to put a label on it. But what I can say is that I work in an NSF safe and tested manufacturing facility, and then additionally, I heavy metal test everything. I am like on top of all my testing, especially phytic acid, anti-nutrients. Like I go above and beyond with that, and I'm happy to share that with you as well if it's helpful.
Wonderful. Yeah, and obviously, you know, if you are working with a tested athlete, we do have limitations, and that's where perhaps an NSF sport certified line, just from like a legality standpoint, would be your best option. But if you're working with the general population or an athlete that is looking for quality but doesn't necessarily need that seal, Core Perform could be an option. Now, in the case of Stephen, if and I'm just sort of thinking of your talk on whey and how that could potentially not be the best choice immediately with a gut issue, could the Designs for Sport grass-fed beef protein be an alternative for a coach that's working with athletes that do require the NSF Sport logo?
So remember that one of those studies, the Bacteroides to Firmicutes ratio one, that increased the protein amount total within the diet, it still changed and altered the microbiota in general. But I do find that beef isolate is easier to digest for a lot of people than whey. I will say that it really matters the gums, and then as long as they don't use gums in it and they don't use artificial sweeteners in it. But I know, Melissa, we were even talking about that you guys needed to get Core Perform in your line and just put the label on it. Put your own label on it.
Yeah, if you're a coach listening and you're working with athletes that are tested, you know, we get it. We totally get it. And we're Designs for Sport is definitely going to continue to expand the offerings that we have, so that, you know, right now we have a collagen protein, a collagen option, a beef option, and a whey option, but absolutely something that is going to be better for gut support, better for an athlete who, and it sounds like a lot of the work that you do could definitely be done in an off season where maybe exercise intensity has gone down, travel has gone down, and you can really hone in and switch your athlete to something like, you know, put them on a gut protocol and put them on some foods that could potentially help for their next season. We'll keep everyone posted on when that happens. So I know that we're a few minutes past, and for those of you that are still on, thank you for continuing to hang with us to have your questions answered. Dasha, you mentioned your handle at the top of the hour, but could you say that again, and how people can continue to connect with you and get some of this amazing education that you offer?
Yeah, it's at Dasha Fitness, and you guys can connect with me, coreperform.com, or just support@coreperform.com. Either one works.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone that attended to another amazing masterclass. This was very, very insightful, and we will be sure to keep you posted on the next one. Dasha, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks everyone for joining.
Bye everyone.
Bye.